You were not born by accident. You did not simply arrive into this world through a series of random events or biological happenstance. Long before your first breath, your soul stood in a realm beyond time and space, conscious, luminous, eternal. It saw everything. Every thread of karma, every ripple of pain, every moment of ecstasy, every lesson unfinished, and it chose, yes, it chose this life. This body. These parents. This path. But why? Why would a soul make such a seemingly irrational, painful choice? Why would a soul choose addiction? Why choose chains over freedom, despair over clarity, self-destruction over self-realization? To understand, you must first know this: your soul does not fear pain. It does not shun darkness. It does not run from suffering as the human mind does. Because your soul knows that within every shadow lies the potential for light. Within every fall lies the invitation to rise. And within every wound lies the key to awakening. Addiction is not chosen as a curse. It is chosen as a crucible, because it is in the fire of addiction that illusions are incinerated. False identities, inherited trauma, unprocessed emotions, generational pain, everything you unconsciously carry must rise to the surface. And in rising, it demands to be seen. To be felt. To be healed. You chose addiction not because you were weak, but because you were strong enough to confront what others would avoid for lifetimes. You chose to enter a lineage that had forgotten how to love themselves. You chose to walk into patterns of emotional starvation, spiritual neglect, and energetic fragmentation. And why? Because your soul knew that through this, you could bring light into a space that had never known healing. You didn't come here to suffer. You came here to transform suffering. You didn't come to numb life. You came to feel it fully, raw, untamed, and real, because only those who have tasted the depths of disconnection can truly appreciate the power of divine union. Only those who have known the hollowness of chasing false pleasure can truly thirst for truth. Your soul chose addiction because it was the doorway to everything you came here to remember, and so, before birth, you stood at the threshold, looking down into the dense vibrations of this world, into the human mind, with all its chaos and cravings. You saw the pain you would endure. The confusion. The shame. The craving that would grip your spirit like a vice, and still, you said yes. You said yes to forgetting so you could remember more deeply. You said yes to fragmentation so you could one day embody wholeness. You said yes to falling so you could know the sacred art of rising. And then, you arrived. You were born into flesh, into form. The veil of forgetting wrapped itself around you like fog. You grew, you stumbled, you learned the world through the mirror of others. And slowly, unconsciously, you began to inherit their wounds. Their fear. Their silence. Their patterns, and then, the hunger began, not a hunger for food, or wealth, or even love, but something more elusive. A hunger for something you couldn't name. A thirst that no amount of water could quench. A longing that pulsed in your chest, aching, echoing through your every step. You tried to fill it, with substances. With distractions. With attention. With numbness. With control. With chaos. With anything that might silence the unbearable truth that you felt separate from others. Separate from yourself. Separate from something bigger, something holy. That separation became your secret. And your secret became your prison. You wore masks to hide the pain. You performed happiness. You faked connection. But beneath it all, you were still searching, still starving, and so the cycle began. Each use, each indulgence, each escape was never about pleasure. It was about relief. A temporary silence to the soul's scream. A momentary pause from the ache of disconnection, but the silence never lasted, because addiction doesn't cure the wound. It amplifies it, and here's the paradox, that amplification is exactly what your soul intended, for only when the pain becomes unbearable do you begin to look within, only when every false idol collapses do you search for what's real. Addiction brings you to the threshold, the dark night of the soul. The point where your mind can no longer explain, justify, or escape what your heart has always known, that something deeper is calling you home. You might fall. You might fail. You might curse the heavens and curse yourself, but all of it, the chaos, the collapse, the confusion, is sacred, because it is breaking you open, and what breaks you, makes space for what saves you. Through the fog of addiction, you begin to catch glimpses of your true self, not the self that performs, not the self that pleases or proves, but the self that simply is. That self has never been addicted. That self has never been ashamed. That self has been quietly waiting, watching, whispering, "Remember me." And in the quiet between cravings, you hear it, that whisper grows louder. And one day, you answer. When you answer that inner whisper, no matter how faint, no matter how trembling, you begin the slow, sacred process of return, not return to who you were before the addiction, but return to who you really are, who you have always been beneath the noise. This is the moment the alchemy begins. You begin to feel again, not just the pain, but the possibility. Not just the fear, but the flicker of faith. You start to realize that the suffering didn't mean you were broken. It meant you were being remade. You are not healing back into the old self. You are awakening into a new self, one forged in fire, baptized in tears, and anchored in truth. Your soul knew this would happen. It knew that in walking through darkness, you would one day become light. That in falling, you would remember how to fly, not through control, but through surrender. And in surrendering, everything changes. You stop fighting your past. You stop running from your shadow. You begin to see your scars not as signs of failure, but as sacred etchings, proof that you have walked through the valley and emerged on the other side. You realize that addiction was never about the substance. It was about the soul's cry for union, a cry to be seen, to be held, to be remembered. And now, you are remembering, one day at a time, one breath at a time. You rise, you begin to forgive yourself, first. Then the others who wounded you, knowingly or unknowingly. Not because they deserve it, but because you do. You deserve to be free. You begin to speak truthfully. To love bravely. To walk gently. To live deeply. You understand now that recovery is not a return, it is a rebirth. A resurrection. You are no longer trying to fix yourself, you are discovering yourself. And what you discover is breathtaking, a soul that has known despair, but chose hope, a heart that has tasted shame, but chose love, a spirit that has walked through hell, but carries heaven in its gaze. Your very existence becomes testimony. Not to your pain, but to your power, because now, you know that the soul chooses its journey not by comfort, but by calling. You know that the wound is the womb of awakening. You know that what nearly destroyed you is what destined you, and that knowledge is no longer conceptual, it's embodied. It lives in your hands, your words, your presence. People around you feel it. They may not understand your past, but they are moved by your presence. Because you have returned to yourself, you have become a living bridge between shadow and light. Between loss and love. Between what is broken and what is holy. So why does a soul choose addiction before birth? Because sometimes, to remember the divine, you must forget yourself entirely. Sometimes, to awaken compassion, you must first drown in the absence of it. Sometimes, to ignite a light strong enough to guide others, you must first walk through the darkest cave. Your addiction was not random. It was not a mistake. It was a spiritual agreement, a path chosen not out of recklessness, but out of radical courage. And now, you are fulfilling that contract, not just by surviving, but by transforming, by using your journey to heal, to teach, to uplift, to remind others who they are when they have forgotten. That is your sacred purpose. You are not here to pretend. You are here to embody grace, to embody wisdom, to embody redemption in its purest form, and in doing so, you become the medicine. Not because you are perfect, but because you are real. You have felt the void, and chosen to love anyway. You have faced the abyss, and chosen to rise anyway. You have walked through death, and chosen to live anyway. This is not just healing. This is divine transmutation. This is soul alchemy. This is your path, not because you were cursed, but because you were called. So walk it now with reverence, not as a victim of your past, but as a vessel of your purpose. Because the world doesn't need more perfection, it needs more people who have known pain, and still chose love, and that is who you are. If this message resonated with something deep inside you, if you felt seen, if you felt remembered, then don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel for more spiritual truths, hidden wisdoms, and soul awakenings. And in the comments, tell us your story, not your polished version, but your real one. Your vulnerability may be the lighthouse for someone else lost at sea. You are not alone on this path. You are part of a sacred collective awakening, so keep rising. Keep remembering. And above all, keep walking the path your soul chose long before this life began. We are here. We see you. And we walk with you.